And it's lights out.
Welcome back to another episode of Drive Thru Penalty. I'm Sean, that's my father Craig. This week we're going to cover last week's race in Saudi Arabia. We are going to talk about this week's race in Miami, Fantasy Formula One, and a little history from Craig. So let's jump into it.
First I got to get the sand out of my hair.
What do we think of last week's race in Saudi Arabia?
I liked the race last week in Saudi Arabia because you didn't know who was going to win it, which we've been saying almost every week. How Oscar went into the first corner and he managed to crawl up beside the pole sitter and kind of made it so Max couldn't make the kind of decision Max likes to make. And he kind of had to short circuit and everything. And looking back on it, Sean, if he had let Oscar back in front of him instead of taking that 5-second penalty, I'm saying he had a really good chance of winning that race.
I agree. However, with this year's dirty air issue, it definitely changes the race for Max. So, for instance, he gives that position back, and Max is in second. Now he's in Oscar's dirty air, and it being so bad this year that I don't even know if it would have been possible for him to fight back and gain that position. So I really don't know if Max giving that position back to Oscar would have changed the race for him. I'd like to think so. It certainly would have made for a more exciting race as a Formula One fan.
It was still pretty exciting.
It was exciting, but as a Formula One fan, to give the contender a 5-second penalty right off the jump is, it's not an ideal situation.
Well, no, but the reason that occurred was because Max will never admit it, and he does not want anybody getting by him, and that's his stubbornness, and I'm going to say it cost him a race.
Well, there was a lot of chatter about whether or not it was a legal move or not. Max sure seems to think he didn't do anything wrong. You saw him in the cool down.
He's never done anything wrong.
In his mind, he hasn't. You're right. Watching the tape back, he did a little dive bomb into the apex. Sure, he might have been ahead, but he never had a chance. He, put a gravel trap there, and, it would have been a completely different situation. So I think the race played out the way it was supposed to. I think Oscar was the better driver in the better car. Being in that dirty air would have been tough no matter what, but
hey. You know what did work last week?
What's that?
They might have gotten driver of the day right for the first time this year.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Max really did run a good race.
He did run a good race. It was that actually made sense this week. So now, Oscar's leading the championship. And he's won 3 races this year. He's 10 points ahead of second place.
That's probably why I'm in second overall in the pool, is because I've had Oscar every single race.
I have also had Oscar Piastri every single race. It was my B tier lineup that didn't do me any well.
Well, but you did win last week.
So I did win last week's pool, and we'll get into that later. But as I've been preaching for the last few weeks, budget building is key, and the only reason that I won this week was because I was able to trade my second constructor for Mercedes, which obviously paid off.
And the only reason I lost this week is because Gasly crashed on the first lap.
That was tough, and you know what? Nobody wants to see Tsunoda and Gasly get into it the first lap, but I mean, it is what it is. Definitely additional pressure on Tsunoda this week, but that's racing.
Any Hamilton update? Well, I have a theory about Hamilton again, and again he was complaining about the car. He said this car will never win. So I don't know what's going on there, but the way I kind of analyze it is that I think Lewis Hamilton is kind of doing the same in this Ferrari as he did last year in the Mercedes-Benz. Is he 40 years old yet? I just think he's just maybe getting to the point in his career where he's still really good, but not the best. And there's been many drivers document. I think Ayrton Senna was the first one, but they said the minute you stop going for the opening, you should probably pack it in.
Are we seeing that with Fernando Alonso right now?
I think so. Yeah.
So let's wrap up Saudi Arabia and get into what really matters is this week's race in Miami.
So what is it you're looking forward to in Miami?
Well, I'm looking forward to the lovely seafood, beaches, nightclubs. Oh, you mean racing?
No, I didn't mean racing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Anyways, other than the race, those things are going to be great. The city's going to be electric this week.
Of the 3 American Grand Prix, I think this one's the most exciting.
Yeah.
I think the most technical, real race is probably in Austin. And I'm not crazy about Vegas.
Not crazy about Vegas. I do like Miami. I think Austin's my favorite of the American circuits,
Yeah.
but definitely looking forward to this week's race.
So do you see any changes in pole sitters or, I mean, you know more about the track because you do it on your sim racing. You know more about the track because you do it on sim racing. I have not been on the circuit. And I tend to remember these newer circuits, race day or qualifying in that. So is there, what's the toughest thing about it? Can you pass in Miami?
You know what? Why don't I take you guys for a lap in Miami and show you what the track looks like?
Is it a one-seater or a two-seater?
We'll make it a two-seater. You're going to have to sit on my lap. Let's go. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. So you asked me if I think anything's going to change this week, and I still think we have our usual suspects up at the top. I think Oscar is stone cold right now. I don't think he's letting the pressure of Max get into his head at all. I think Lando's a different story. I'm not so sure as to where he's going to finish, but I think you're going to see Max fighting. I think Charles is going to be in the picture. I think Lewis is still going to be running kind of fifth or sixth. You might get Antonelli in there. George looks good. I think it's going to be pretty much the same guys on top.
Yeah, Lando's been making a couple of errors. I think Lando, out of everybody, he might be under the most pressure right now. I don't think he had any intention when Piastri first came up 3 years ago that Piastri was going to be doing what he's doing. And you know what? One of these days, Piastri's going to be the driver of the day because he's been probably the best driver every week.
He has, and I think Zach Brown actually mentioned it earlier in the year that he expects to see them fighting throughout the season, even expects to see a collision, which is kind of wild. You know, papaya rules. We'll see how that runs throughout the rest of the season, but I don't know. I still think McLaren's going to come up on top this one. I think you'll see a Ferrari on the podium somewhere, probably Charles. Maybe Max in second again. I don't know.
Why wouldn't Max?
Well, he's pissed, and anytime Max, he gets upset like this, is when you see him really come out and show up at the next race. So
I don't see Ferrari on the podium.
No? What is your podium this week?
My podium is Piastri.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Lando number 2. And if I had to pick, I would probably say Max number 3, but it could be Russell.
Okay, that's pretty good. You want to hear mine?
I guess I have to.
Oscar on top. Charles second. Max Verstappen third. Locked in. So I'm excited for the sprint race week in Miami. We got more racing, more action. It's going to be a good one.
At least we're dressed for it.
Yeah. What do you mean? I dress like this every day. So let's get into my favorite segment of the video. It sounds like we have a very interesting topic today. F1 history with Craig.
Let's go back in time to 1930 in Surrey, England. Charles Bernard Ecclestone came onto the planet. And he was an entrepreneur, I think, probably the day he was born. He wasn't really big on school. but he used to like go to the bakery and buy a couple of dozen buns and then sell them to his mates for lunch, and he'd make a little bit of money there. And then as he got a little bit older, became motorcycle parts, and he really, at a young age, did the buy low, sell high routine. Didn't do well in school, so he got out of there as soon as he could, and him and his partner, they both kind of opened up a business which was selling those motorcycle parts and car parts, whatever they could get and mark up and make money. But on the side, he was doing some car racing. He was at Brands Hatch, which is an old favorite in England. And at the age of 19, he was very competitive. And after Brands Hatch, he tried to get involved in the upscale. He tried to qualify twice for Formula One, and he didn't make it. So at the age of 27, he was approached by a driver to kind of like manage the team. Things were a little different back then. And so he took on this role, and he was a well-known driver. The name escapes me right now, but he died in 1958 in the Moroccan Grand Prix. And this shook Ecclestone right to the soul, and he retired again from Formula One. In 1971, he was approached by the Brabham racing team. They wanted him to invest in the team and get involved, and they offered him an opportunity to buy half of the team. Well, he renegotiated that. He ended up buying the whole team. And in 1972, when he finally was at the helm, they weren't doing that well, so he fired the chief engineer and he rehired someone else that he preferred. And by 1973, they were winning a handful of races around the world. It wasn't just in one situation. And he ended up running that team, owning that team for 15 years. And in 1987, he sold it for $5 million US to a Swiss team, which $5 million in those days kind of put him on the map. He was now a fairly wealthy man. In 1971, he was approached by like ownership of the teams, and there was a managing group in Formula One, and they wanted him to get involved in it because up until that point there seemed like there was no rules, and the country that was paying for the right to host the race, they would be bartering back and forth with the teams and as to what kind of sponsorship it was, and there was no real rhythm to it. And Bernie kind of said, we can do better than that. And he ended up becoming, when they asked him to join, he ended up becoming the CEO. And there was another group that was also involved, and they got into a real barnstorm over TV rights. And because Bernie realized that TV rights down the road are going to be very lucrative. So Bernie ended up negotiating that, and he got 30% of all the income.
That's pretty good.
And he was thankful for that. But the guys that own the racing teams, they just wanted to race. They were already very successful businessmen. They didn't care about the money. They just loved the fact that they're traveling around the world and hosting these races and, with all the hoopla that goes with them back in those days. Bernie's deal was to make sure that teams showed up. So what he had to do was kind of guarantee some money to all the teams, and that's kind of how a lot of this started. He was saying, for instance, in Mexico one year, he asked the organizers, when are you going to start the race? And in Mexico, they said, as soon as all the people are sitting down. So this became a real problem going forward, because if you have a television contract, you have to be able to say what time you start. And you have to be able to coordinate it with the crews for the TV, the networks. They had a big deal going with the network. So this just made things better. That operation was called the Concord Agreement. It changed every few years. They kind of refurbished it and changed some things around to make it more adaptable to the times, but it never went away. And in 2016, Liberty Media took over. And one of the first things they did was promote Bernie so far up the ladder that they didn't have to tell him anything that they were doing. And he wasn't very happy with it, but of course he was paid a great amount of money to do that. But that was kind of the end of his I think he's still in that position, But it is kind of the end of his involvement in F1. And boy, if you ever get a chance, 'cause there's a lot more to learn about this man. He was a gem. And if you ever want to, just dig into that hole in the internet or get a couple of books and read them. There's lots to read about him. And he's had trouble with the law and, you know, women's rights groups, and he's done it. But I'm going to keep it down to motorsport. So to finish it off, he single-handedly brought international recognition to Formula One motor racing.
Thanks, Craig. Another interesting one this week. I know Bernie Ecclestone, but I definitely didn't know all of that. So thanks very much for sharing. This guy sounds like a really interesting guy. And
hey, maybe by the race will be weekend at Bernie's.
yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Maybe this is the time for you to take over and delve into the world of fantasy Formula One. Before you do that, for us regular folk, is there drivers that you think, and we covered this, but I'm just speaking as far as pool-wise, is there any initiative to get rid of certain players because, you know, their point system works and pick up different players, and anything that you can pass on to the folk?
Definitely. And if you stick around, we're going to get real deep into it. We're going to hit the F1 fantasy tools, we're going to the budget building, why these drivers need to be subbed out for different ones. But definitely, Oscar Piastri is still my number one pick. Again, this year is not only about points, but it's about budget building. The system's a little bit differently this year, so it's not necessarily what you think they're going to do this week, and it's more about what they've done the last couple weeks. It's a 3-week window, so certain drivers are kind of dropping off, certain ones we're picking up. Doohan's a no-go for me this week. He's off the bench. Sorry, Jack. Going to be replacing him with somebody like Liam Lawson, who now is coming into his third race, who can actually score points, who's also a potential for making that 0.6 million increase. I like Fernando Alonso this week for budget building. He's a good option. Again, we'll show you why. But Ollie Behrman still looks amazing. Definitely a top pick for me. Haas guys, if you're looking to build budget, Haas as a constructor is a good option. If you can afford it, Ferrari would be a good option this week. But thinking down the road after the sprint, there might need to be some changes made in your squad. So, you know, they do reserve more of a budget than a team like Mercedes is. So I think I'm going to hold off on that for a couple weeks. It's sprint race weekend, so do we use our limitless chip? We'll talk about that in a bit, but it's going to be an exciting one. Let's jump into it.
Welcome back to the F1 Fantasy segment of this video. Today, really quickly, we're going to go over a couple changes that I would suggest you make if you have these drivers on your team. Quickly, chips to consider. It is going to be a heavy chip use with the limitless this weekend, so is this a good weekend for you to use it? We'll talk about that in just a sec. But hopefully you guys were able to build some budget last week. We did an excellent job. We lost some money with Doohan, but that was kind of expected. So what we're going to do is we're going to head on over to the budget builder section on the F1 Fantasy Tools website, and it's going to help us decide on who to pick up and who to drop. So we're here on the budget building section of the F1 Fantasy Tools website. Basically, this is going to help us make all the decisions that we need to this week. This tool is amazing. So if you look at these drivers, these are the price increase and decrease thresholds and the number of points that they're going to need to score to fall into each of those categories. So if you take a look at the top, Piastri, he needs to score only 3 points to increase the max value this week of 0.3 million. Looking at most importantly our B-tier drivers, because that's where most of you guys are probably questioning who to pick up, who to drop. This is really, really good and really straightforward. You most likely have Behrman and Hadjar on your team, and as you'll see, they only need 8 points and 4 points to increase by the maximum of $0.6 million, which is excellent. Bortoleto, who is on most people's team, has reached the floor of $4.5 million, so he can only go up from here. If he scores 10 points this week, he's going to go up to $0.6 million. If he scores only 6 points this week, he's going to increase by $0.2 million, and so on. So whether he goes up, he goes down. He's really just a great reserve for keeping budget for later. So looking at the other options, Lawson would be a great pickup this week. He only needs to score 8 points to increase by 0.6 million, 2 points to increase by 0.2 million. We're hoping it's a sprint race weekend. He's going to be able to manage that. My other option would be Alonso. Now he needs to score 3 more points than Lawson does, but I think I trust him more as a driver. His experience comes into play here. It's a sprint race weekend. I don't know if the Aston Martin's as good as the V car, but I'm hoping that Alonso can put up 11 points this weekend and hit that 0.6 million. Worst case scenario, only puts up 5 points. We still get that 0.2 million increase. So I'm thinking I want to reserve. I'm most likely not going to use my limitless chip this week. I'm going to save it for another week like Imola, where you can get a bunch of Delta, or another sprint race weekend. So if your team is set up and you are happy with the drivers you currently have on your team, and whether or not you think they're going to increase in price next week, that might be a good time to activate the Limitless. Keep in mind, when you activate it, your team, your 2 constructors, your 5 drivers, they're going to be the ones that are gaining you or losing you money that week in the background. It has nothing to do with the 5 drivers you choose and the 2 constructors. It's all what happens behind the scenes. So if you set yourself up for a really nice price increase, maybe this is the weekend to use the Limitless. I'm still kind of fighting for that max increase every week because I have a lot of catching up to do, as I'm sure some of you guys do. So I'm probably going to save my Limitless for a little bit later and roll that on down the road. The only driver I want to change this week is Jack Doohan. There's been some rumors that we might lose him after Miami and moving into Imola. I think it was his manager that let it slip on an interview once he thought he was off air. So, keep in mind, that's going to be a transfer that you're most likely going to have to use in the next 1 or 2 weeks. So giving myself an extra transfer this week is going to be huge. I'm just going to get rid of Doohan. And as I said, there's 2 drivers that I'm looking at. And those drivers are Liam Lawson, who's $6.6 million, and Fernando Alonso, who is $6.2 million. I know he needs a little bit more work this weekend, but I'm fairly confident that we're going to be able to get those 10 points from him. So I'm going to lock that team in. This is my team this week. You never know. Always watch practice. Because it's a sprint race weekend, you get to watch that extra qualifying session and make your decision then.
Well, Sean, thank you for the information. I hope that helps myself more than anybody else, but I hope everybody else watching that's in the pool is learning something, or at least exchanging some strategy.
Another exciting week. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in. We hope you liked it. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button. It means a lot to us.
Hey, Sean, pass me the suntan lotion.
Bienvenuto a Miami.